Welcome. This is Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, your host. Good news for you. My close friend Robert Ian is starting to produce his weekly commentaries again. He did it for many, many years. He was on Gold Secret Radio with Chris Waltzek, and now he's on FSN. So we're going to do this weekly. Love to get your comments, your feelings about it. So, Robert, take it away.
Welcome, everyone. This is Robert Ian with ConquerChange.com. This discussion represents my first official weekly installment for the Financial Survival Network. If you haven't yet heard my introductory interview with Kerry Lutz earlier this past week, please take a listen. For those of you who may recognize my voice but can't quite place the face, I provided weekly commentaries on Gold Secret Radio from 2007 until 2020, at which time I took a brief hiatus to manage a family medical situation. However, I've never disengaged from the gold, silver, economic, financial, geopolitical, housing, and world event topics that I analyzed those 13 years in over 600 weekly discussions. I spent some time with Kerry a few months ago over the Christmas holiday where we discussed bringing my commentaries to the Financial Survival Network. And now, 3 months later, we are ready to engage. So many changes are upon us right now that deciding exactly where to start was a somewhat Herculean task. At the time of this recording, the price of gold is now anchored above $3,000. And groups like Citi have recently hiked their gold price target for the next 3 months to $3,200 an ounce. There's a lot of talk and massive speculation on the possibility of a gold revaluation and what that would mean to the gold market and its investors. President Trump has been taunting the media, suggesting that Doge will be conducting an audit of the gold at Fort Knox. The role of a Bitcoin strategic reserve is active in the various news cycles. Much public discussion has ensued about what it would look like and mean for the Bitcoin market and potentially the gold market if the two are somehow directly or indirectly linked. The suggestion and resulting geopolitical dance about a potential U.S. acquisition in some way, shape, or form of Greenland and Canada by the U.S. has many, many layers of complexity. Greenland in particular is discussed in a strategic manner. And of course, there's the natural resource side to Canada. But there are other lesser discussed motives that may exist outside of these heavily advertised reasons. We'll get into these and all of the topics I have mentioned so far over the course of my first commentaries here on the Financial Survival Network. In preparation for this inaugural broadcast, I was reviewing some of the papers my good friend in the gold market, Adrian Douglas, had written during my early years of doing commentaries. Adrian, who passed away in 2013, in my opinion, was the smartest guy on the planet at decoding and unpackaging manipulation in complex economic systems, including the precious metals. I'll discuss his work from time to time, and right now I want to focus on a statement he made in his paper on proof of gold price suppression, gold and the US dollar, which he published in July of 2010. He said that while it is true that the dollar can be created out of thin air, it is not true to state that it is backed by nothing. He said it is in fact backed by the U.S. Treasury gold. However, in 1971, President Nixon, quote, temporarily suspended the convertibility of the US dollar into gold. And now today, 54 years later, this temporary suspension is still in force. He pointed out that this did not, however, change the backing of the dollar by gold. It just prevented redeeming dollars into gold by the central bank. He said there has been no new official definition of the dollar since 1971. Statements that the dollar is backed by confidence or backed by all the goods and services in the economy are false. The dollar is backed by the gold of the U.S. Treasury, and redeemability was temporarily suspended in 1971. In a subsequent video, I'll discuss Adrian's 2010 gold price calculation of $54,000 per ounce, based on an estimated 2.3% gold backing of our currency at what was then a $1,200 per ounce gold price. For the moment, I want to stay focused on President Nixon. I went to the internet and found an actual video of a TV broadcast from 1971 when Nixon actually announced to the world that he was closing the gold window and ending the Bretton Woods international monetary system. This is the exact quote Nixon made in his public address on this topic. He said, "Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Conley to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of the monetary stability and in the best interests of the United States." When Nixon said, "I have directed Secretary Conley to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets," it is very clear, without equivocation, that this suspension of gold convertibility was and remains a temporary action. Now, granted, 54 years later seems to be a stretch in the credible definition of temporary. But because it is temporary, if we think about it realistically, it could conceivably change back at any time by the stroke of an executive pen. And we know all too well just how active President Trump's executive pen has been as of late. And speaking of executive pens, there is a striking similarity in another part of Nixon's same speech, where he introduced a 10% import tax, what we would call tariffs today. Now, this is an exact quote from Nixon's speech. He said, "I am determined that the American dollar must never again be hostage in the hands of international speculators. I'm taking one further step to protect the dollar to improve our balance of payments and to increase jobs for Americans. As a temporary measure, I am today imposing an additional tax of 10% on goods imported into the United States. This is a better solution for international trade than direct controls on the amount of imports. This import tax is a temporary action. It isn't directed against any other country. It's an action to make certain that American products will not be at a disadvantage because of unfair exchange rates. When the unfair treatment has ended, the import tax will end as well." He finished by saying, as a result of these actions, the product of American labor will be more competitive, and the unfair edge some of our foreign competition has will be removed. This is a major reason our trade balance has eroded over the past 15 years. You know, if you listen carefully to those words of Nixon and the words and actions of President Trump today, in part it does seem like we are now experiencing a blast from the past. Nixon's temporary import tax only lasted until December of 1971. If we compare that to the now 54-year temporary suspension of gold convertibility, one might suspect that we could be due for a change in that department as well. Enter Judy Shelton, an advisor to President Trump who he nominated to the Federal Reserve in his first term. In some of her recent interviews, she has discussed how the U.S. could mark to market the gold holdings of the U.S. from its current $42.22 per ounce to the current market value of gold. She has suggested the creation of a gold-backed treasury bond with up to a 50-year maturity that could be redeemed in either the face value amount or a pre-specified amount of gold per ounce, creating for the bondholder the equivalent of a U.S. Treasury security and a future option on gold. A possible time frame for this to be issued would be on or around the U.S.'s 250th birthday, which will occur next year on July 4th, 2026. Keep in mind the market value of gold could potentially be much higher than its current $3,000 per ounce. If and when such a mark-to-market event might occur, because a significant amount of upward pressure on the gold price could occur between now and the introduction of such an instrument. These are very exciting times in the gold market, the U.S. economy, and the world in general, from the perspective that now, finally, a brain trust is appearing on the global stage that appears to be arguing for possibilities instead of limitations, arguing for more financial freedom and independence instead of more debt and financial slavery. Each week on the Financial Survival Network, I'll be discussing and analyzing a cross-section of these truly historic discussions and happenings. Be sure to tune in, and be sure to visit my website at conquerchange.com, where in the coming weeks and months, I'll be posting these and other discussions and interviews. Also, be sure to visit and sign up to receive my free email newsletter. If you do that now, I'll send you a free PDF copy of my book, How to Identify, Master, and Conquer Change, which I published as a supplement to my flagship keynote speech on conquering change, which has been presented live to major corporations and associations across the U.S. for over 2 decades. For example, one CEO told me he did all the change-related exercises in the book, and it literally transformed his personal and professional outlook, productivity, and happiness. My goal is that in the coming months and years, you too will benefit in some small way from the insights presented in our discussions. Because ultimately, it's the little difference that makes the big difference. And until next time, this is Robert Ian with conquerchange.com. Be well, everyone.